Welcome back to our channel, where we explore the darkest corners of human history. Today, we're diving into one of the most disturbing yet fascinating aspects of historical cruelty: torture methods that were never meant to be torture methods at all. These are the accidental discoveries that became some of history's most feared punishments. What you're about to learn will shock you. These weren't the calculated inventions of sadistic minds, but rather unfortunate accidents, failed experiments, and unintended consequences that human cruelty later adopted and perfected. From medical procedures gone wrong to construction accidents that inspired centuries of suffering, we'll explore how chance, fate, and human misfortune combined to create some of history's most notorious torture techniques. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that this content is purely educational and historical in nature. We're examining these topics to understand how human society has evolved and to ensure such darkness never returns to our world. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and prepare to discover the twisted ways that accident and intention collided throughout human history. Chapter 1. The Accidental Birth of Water. Torture. The leaky roof that launched 1,000 screams. Our first story takes us to ancient China, around 500 BCE, during the spring and autumn period. It was a time of warfare, political intrigue, and rapid social change. In a small prison in what is now Shandong province, a maintenance oversight would accidentally create one of history's most psychologically devastating torture methods. The story begins with Wei Zhang, a prison warden who was known for his relatively humane treatment of prisoners. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Wei believed that confinement itself was punishment enough, and he took pride in maintaining clean, functional facilities. His prison was considered a model of efficiency and order. However, during the monsoon season of 496 BCE, a series of heavy rains exposed a critical structural flaw in the prison's roof. A slow, persistent leak developed directly above one of the solitary confinement cells. The leak was so minor that it produced only a single drop of water every few seconds, hardly enough to flood the cell or create immediate concern. The prisoner in that cell was a minor official named Chen Lu, who had been convicted of embezzling grain supplies during a famine. His sentence was 3 months of solitary confinement, which was considered standard for such crimes. Chen Lu was expected to serve his time quietly and be released with his dignity relatively intact. But the steady drip of water, falling precisely on the same spot on Chen Lu's forehead every few seconds, created an entirely unexpected psychological effect. At first, it was merely annoying. Chen Lu could move his head to avoid the drops, but the cell was small, and the optimal position for sleeping and sitting happened to be directly under the leak. The psychological unraveling, what happened next, was a gradual descent into madness that nobody anticipated. The human brain, it turns out, is remarkably sensitive to repetitive, predictable stimuli. The constant drip created a form of sensory torture that was completely unintentional but devastatingly effective. Chen Lu's experience was documented by a prison scribe who was keeping records for administrative purposes. The progression was both fascinating and horrifying. Day 1 to 3. Chen Lu complained about the leak but remained generally good-natured about it, even joking with guards about the indoor rain. Day 4 to 7. He began showing signs of irritation and requested to be moved to another cell. When told that all other cells were occupied, he became increasingly agitated. Day 8 to 14. Sleep deprivation set in as the constant dripping made rest nearly impossible. Chen Lu began talking to himself and showing signs of disorientation. Day 15 to 21. Paranoia developed. Chen Lu became convinced that the dripping was deliberate and that the guards were somehow controlling it to drive him insane. Day 22 to 30. Complete psychological breakdown. Chen Lu was found one morning having torn his own hair out in clumps and carved marks into the cell wall with his fingernails, apparently trying to count the drops. The warden's horrifying realization: Wei Zhang was initially baffled by Chen Lu's condition. He had seen prisoners serve much longer sentences in identical conditions without showing such severe psychological deterioration. It wasn't until he spent a night in the cell himself, investigating the strange case, that he understood the power of the seemingly innocent water drop. The drop falls with the regularity of a heartbeat. Wei Zhang wrote in his administrative report, "But it is not your heartbeat. It is the heartbeat of some malevolent spirit that has taken residence in your mind. You cannot ignore it, you cannot escape it, and you cannot predict exactly when it will come, though you know it will come. It is the sound of time itself, marking every moment of your suffering." What Wei Zhang had accidentally discovered was the principle of irregular regularity, a form of psychological torture that would later be refined and systematized by cultures around the world. The water drop torture was particularly insidious because it caused no physical harm whatsoever, yet could break a person's mind completely. The spread of an accidental discovery, word of the water drop incident, spread through the Chinese administrative network, and soon, other prison wardens were experimenting with similar techniques. The accidental discovery was systematized and refined. Different rates of dripping were tested. Various liquids were tried, and the optimal positioning was calculated. The method eventually made its way to Europe through trade routes and diplomatic exchanges. During the medieval period, it became a favorite of inquisitors because it left no physical evidence of torture, which was sometimes important for legal and religious reasons. The technique was further refined during the Spanish Inquisition, where it was combined with other sensory deprivation methods. Prisoners would be strapped to boards at an angle, with their heads positioned so that water would drip not just on their foreheads, but also potentially into their noses, creating a sensation of drowning that lasted for hours. Modern understanding of the phenomenon today, we understand the neurological mechanisms behind why the accidental water drop torture was so effective. The human brain has evolved to notice and be disturbed by irregular patterns, as they often signify danger in natural environments. The water drop torture exploits this evolutionary programming by creating a pattern that is regular enough to be noticeable but irregular enough to prevent habituation. The auditory component is equally important. The sound of each drop creates an anticipatory response in the nervous system. The victim's brain begins to predict when the next drop will fall, and the slight variations in timing create constant anxiety and stress. This state of hypervigilance quickly exhausts the mind's resources, leading to psychological breakdown. Sleep deprivation compounds the effect exponentially. REM sleep is crucial for processing traumatic experiences and maintaining psychological stability. The constant interruption of sleep cycles by the unpredictable dripping creates a cascade of mental health deterioration that can become irreversible surprisingly quickly. The moral implications of accidental cruelty, the story of water drop torture, raises profound questions about the nature of human cruelty and the role of intention in creating suffering. Wei Zhang never intended to torture anyone. He was trying to run a humane prison system, yet his oversight created a method of psychological torture that would cause immeasurable suffering for centuries to come. This pattern would repeat itself throughout history. Well-meaning individuals would accidentally discover principles of human psychology that could be weaponized for torture, and less scrupulous people would systematize and refine these discoveries for deliberately cruel purposes. The water drop incident also highlights how environmental factors can become torture devices with no modification whatsoever. A leaky roof, a dripping faucet, or even the sound of rain on a metal surface can become instruments of psychological warfare if applied in the right circumstances. Chapter 2. The Rack, from medical treatment to instrument of agony, the healers. Dilemma. Our next story takes us to medieval Europe, specifically to a monastery in what is now southern France, around 1150 CE. Brother Augustine was a monk physician who had dedicated his life to healing the sick and injured. His monastery served as both a spiritual center and a medical facility, treating everyone from local peasants to injured knights returning from the Crusades. Brother Augustine had a particular interest in treating spinal injuries, which were common among laborers and warriors of the time. He had observed that many patients with back problems seemed to improve when their spines were gently stretched, and he had developed a systematic approach to spinal manipulation that was quite advanced for its time. The monastery had a carpentry workshop where Brother Augustine worked with the craftsmen to create medical devices. His most ambitious project was a device designed to provide controlled therapeutic stretching for patients with spinal compression injuries. The device consisted of a wooden frame with ropes and pulleys that could be adjusted to apply gentle, consistent pressure to different parts of the spine. The therapeutic innovation, Brother Augustine's stretching device, was, by medieval standards, a marvel of engineering and medical understanding. The frame was constructed from seasoned oak, with carefully positioned anchor points that could accommodate patients of different sizes. The rope system used a series of pulleys that allowed for precise control of the stretching force. The treatment protocol that Brother Augustine developed was remarkably sophisticated. Patients would be positioned on the device, with padding protecting their joints and pressure points. The stretching would be applied gradually, over the course of several sessions, with careful attention to the patient's comfort and response. Initial results were promising. Several patients with chronic back pain reported significant improvement after treatment. A knight named Sir Bertrand, who had suffered a severe back injury during the siege of Damascus, credited Brother Augustine's device with restoring the ability to ride and fight. Word of the monk's innovative treatment began to spread throughout the region. Other monasteries requested detailed descriptions of the device so they could construct their own versions. Medical practitioners from across Europe began making pilgrimages to witness the revolutionary treatment firsthand. The tragic accident, the transformation from healing device to torture instrument, began with a single, catastrophic accident. In the spring of 1153, Brother Augustine was treating a young woman named Marie, who had suffered a severe back injury after falling from a horse. Marie was the daughter of a local lord, and her treatment was being closely monitored by several other medical practitioners who had come to observe Brother Augustine's methods. The accident occurred due to a combination of factors that created a perfect storm of mechanical failure and human error. The rope that controlled the primary stretching mechanism had developed a weak point due to repeated use. During Marie's treatment session, this rope suddenly snapped under tension. However, instead of simply releasing the stretching force as it should have, the mechanical failure caused a chain reaction in the pulley system. The sudden release of tension in one rope caused the others to shift and tighten unexpectedly. Marie's body was subjected to a violent, uncontrolled stretching force that was far beyond anything the device was designed to produce. The result was immediate and horrifying. Marie's shoulder was dislocated, several ribs were cracked, and her spine was subjected to extreme tension that caused permanent damage. Her screams echoed throughout the monastery, drawing crowds of horrified witnesses who saw the gentle healing device transformed into an instrument of agony. The psychological impact on the observer, perhaps even more significant than the physical trauma, was the psychological impact on those who witnessed the accident. The observers, who had come to learn about innovative medical treatment, instead witnessed what appeared to be a deliberate act of torture. The screams, the obvious agony, and the mechanical precision of the device created a deeply disturbing impression. One of the witnesses was a man named Guillaume de Montfort, who served as an interrogator for the local church authorities. Guillaume had been struggling with the problem of extracting confessions from suspected heretics without violating church prohibitions against shedding blood. The accident he witnessed gave him a horrifying inspiration. Guillaume realized that the device could be modified to produce the same terrifying effect intentionally. By removing the safety mechanisms and increasing the mechanical advantage of the pulley system, the healing device could be transformed into a torture device that would cause excruciating pain without necessarily causing death. The systematic corruption of medical knowledge. What happened next represents one of the darkest chapters in the history of medical knowledge being corrupted for cruel purposes. Guillaume commissioned the monastery's carpenters to create a modified version of Brother Augustine's device, ostensibly for medical research purposes. The modifications were subtle but significant. The safety mechanisms that prevented overextension were removed. The padding that protected joints and pressure points was eliminated. The pulley system was redesigned to provide greater mechanical advantage, allowing interrogators to apply much greater force with less effort. Most insidiously, Guillaume added features that were designed specifically to maximize psychological impact. The device was constructed to be deliberately intimidating in appearance, with iron fittings and restraints that looked more like instruments of war than medical equipment. The spread of the corrupted knowledge. Guillaume's modified device proved to be devastatingly effective as a torture instrument. The combination of extreme physical pain and psychological terror made it nearly impossible for victims to resist. News of the device's effectiveness spread quickly through networks of church and secular authorities. The irony was bitter and profound. Brother Augustine's device had been designed to relieve suffering and restore function to injured bodies. Its corrupted descendant was designed to cause maximum suffering while keeping victims alive and conscious for as long as possible. The rack, as it came to be known, became one of the most feared instruments in the arsenal of medieval interrogators. It was used throughout Europe for centuries, causing immeasurable suffering to thousands of victims. The device became so associated with torture that even today, the word rack evokes images of medieval dungeons and systematic cruelty. The original inventors, Brother Augustine, learned of his device's transformation through reports from other monasteries. The news devastated him. His life's work, dedicated to healing and compassion, had been perverted into an instrument of deliberate cruelty. Historical records suggest that Brother Augustine destroyed all of his notes and designs related to the stretching device. He reportedly spent the remainder of his life in prayer and penance, tormented by the knowledge that his attempt to heal had inadvertently provided a blueprint for torture. The monastery, where Brother Augustine worked, eventually abandoned its medical practice entirely, focusing solely on spiritual matters. The healing tradition that had flourished there for generations was abandoned, in part because of the association with the torture device that had emerged from their medical research. Technical evolution of accidental cruelty. The rack underwent continuous improvement as it spread throughout Europe. Different regions developed their own variations, each designed to maximize effectiveness for specific types of interrogation. The Spanish version included features designed to target specific joints and muscle groups. The English version incorporated elements designed to create maximum psychological impact through sound and visual intimidation. Engineers and craftsmen, who had originally been involved in creating medical devices, found themselves recruited to design torture equipment. The same technical knowledge that had been used to heal was systematically applied to cause harm. The rack also inspired numerous other torture devices that used similar principles of mechanical advantage and controlled force application. Once the basic principle was established, creative minds found countless ways to apply it for cruel purposes. Modern implications and lessons. The story of the rack illustrates how quickly beneficial technology can be corrupted for harmful purposes. The same mechanical principles that made Brother Augustine's device effective for healing made it devastatingly effective for torture, when applied with malicious intent. This pattern has repeated itself throughout history and continues today. Technologies developed for beneficial purposes, from chemicals to electronics to psychological techniques, are regularly adapted for harmful uses by those with malicious intent. The rack also demonstrates the importance of considering the potential for misuse when developing new technologies or techniques. Brother Augustine could not have foreseen how his healing device would be corrupted, but the tragic outcome highlights the need for safeguards and ethical considerations in innovation. Chapter 3. The Iron Maiden. A construction accident that became legend. The statue maker's pride. Our journey now takes us to Nuremberg, Germany, in the year 1515. During the height of the Renaissance, the city was a bustling center of commerce, art, and craftsmanship. Among the many skilled artisans working in Nuremberg was a master metalsmith named Johann Eisenhut, whose workshop was renowned throughout the Holy Roman Empire for creating beautiful religious statuary and decorative ironwork. Johann had been commissioned by the city's cathedral to create a life-size statue of the Virgin Mary for the church's main altar. This was to be his masterpiece, a hollow bronze figure that would be filled with precious relics and serve as the centerpiece of the cathedral's religious celebrations. The statue was designed to be opened ceremonially during special feast days, revealing the sacred relics within. Asterisk. The technical challenges of creating such a statue were enormous. The figure had to be perfectly proportioned, beautifully detailed, and mechanically sound. The opening mechanism had to be both secure and smooth, allowing for dramatic religious ceremonies while protecting the valuable relics inside. Johann spent months designing the internal structure of the statue. The figure would be opened by a complex mechanism of hinges and springs that would cause the front half to swing open smoothly. The interior would be lined with velvet and decorated with precious metals to create a suitable housing for the holy relics. The engineering marvel. The statue that Johann created was truly remarkable. Standing nearly 6 feet tall, it was crafted from the finest bronze and decorated with intricate details that showcased the master craftsman's skill. The opening mechanism was a marvel of Renaissance engineering, using a series of carefully balanced springs and counterweights to ensure smooth operation. The interior of the statue was as impressive as the exterior. Johann had lined it with deep blue velvet and decorated it with golden stars, creating a representation of the heavens that would frame the sacred relics. Small shelves and compartments were built into the interior walls to hold different types of relics securely. The opening ceremony was planned as a major religious celebration. The entire city would gather in the cathedral to witness the miraculous opening of the statue and the revelation of the sacred relics within. Johann was particularly proud of a special feature he had added when the statue opened. A hidden mechanism would release a cloud of incense, creating a mystical effect that would enhance the religious experience. The mechanism of disaster, the disaster that would transform Johann's masterpiece into a legendary torture device, occurred during the final testing phase, just days before the scheduled ceremony. Johann was making final adjustments to the opening mechanism when a critical component failed catastrophically. The springs that controlled the opening had been carefully calibrated to provide smooth, controlled movement. However, one of the springs had developed a stress fracture during the testing process, when Johann activated the mechanism for what he intended to be the final test. This weakened spring suddenly snapped. The failure of one spring created a chain reaction that affected the entire mechanism. The carefully balanced system of counterweights and springs became unbalanced, causing the statue to close with tremendous force. Unfortunately, Johann had been leaning inside the statue, making final adjustments to the incense release mechanism. When the catastrophic failure occurred, the statue closed on Johann with the force of a giant trap. The bronze walls, which had been designed to fit together perfectly when closed, crushed him instantly. His screams echoed through the workshop, but by the time his apprentices could figure out how to reopen the statue, Johann was dead. The witnesses and the legend, the accident was witnessed by several of Johann's apprentices and by a church official who had come to inspect the completed statue. The image of the beautiful religious figure, closing like a deadly trap on its crater, was both horrifying and unforgettable. News of the accident spread quickly through Nuremberg and beyond. The story became embellished with each telling, transforming from a tragic accident into a tale of divine judgment or supernatural vengeance. Some claimed that Johann had been punished for his pride in creating such a magnificent work. Others suggested that the statue had been possessed by evil spirits. The statue itself became an object of fascination and fear. The church officials were unsure what to do with it. It was clearly a masterpiece of craftsmanship, but it had become associated with death and misfortune. The religious significance of the statue was overshadowed by the circumstances of its creator's death. The interrogator's inspiration among those who heard the story of Johann's death was a man named Heinrich Kramer, who served as an interrogator for the Holy Roman Empire's ecclesiastical courts. Kramer had been struggling with the challenge of extracting confessions from suspected witches and heretics, while adhering to church guidelines about torture methods. The story of the statue that had killed its creator gave Kramer a terrible inspiration. He realized that a similar device could be created specifically for interrogation purposes. A hollow figure that could close around a victim would be an incredibly effective torture device. Combining physical confinement with extreme psychological terror, Kramer commissioned a metalsmith to create a modified version of Johann's statue design. The new device would be made of iron rather than bronze, and would include numerous spikes on the interior surfaces. The opening mechanism would be controllable from the outside, allowing interrogators to slowly close the device around victims while demanding confessions. The birth of the Iron Maiden. The device that Kramer commissioned became known as the Iron Maiden, though it bore little resemblance to Johann's original religious statue. The figure was deliberately designed to be intimidating rather than beautiful, with a stern face and imposing presence. The interior was lined with sharp spikes positioned to cause maximum pain without immediately killing the victim. The psychological impact of the Iron Maiden was as important as its physical effects. Victims would be shown the device before interrogation began, allowing their imagination to anticipate the horror of being enclosed within it. The threat of the Iron Maiden often proved as effective as its actual use. The device became one of the most feared instruments of the Inquisition. Stories of its use spread throughout Europe, often becoming exaggerated in the telling. The Iron Maiden became a symbol of medieval cruelty and religious oppression, its reputation far exceeding its actual use. The mythology versus reality. Modern historians have debated whether the Iron Maiden was actually used as extensively as legend suggests. Some evidence suggests that the device was more of a psychological weapon than a frequently used torture instrument. The mere presence of the Iron Maiden in a dungeon may have been sufficient to extract confessions without actually using it. However, the legend of the Iron Maiden became more powerful than the reality. The device became a symbol of medieval barbarity, representing the extremes of human cruelty and religious fanaticism. The image of the Iron Maiden has persisted in popular culture long after the medieval period ended. The irony is that the device originated from a tragic accident involving a religious statue designed to honor the Virgin Mary. Johann Eisenhardt's masterpiece. Created with devotion and skill, it became the inspiration for an instrument of terror that would haunt the historical imagination for centuries. The spread of accidental innovation. The success of the Iron Maiden as a torture device led to numerous variations and improvements. Different regions developed their own versions, each tailored to local preferences and needs. The basic principle of the closing chamber was adapted to create various other torture devices. The technical knowledge required to create effective Iron Maidens spread through networks of craftsmen and interrogators. What had begun as a single, tragic accident became a systematic approach to torture that influenced the design of numerous other devices. The Iron Maiden also inspired psychological torture techniques that didn't require physical devices. The principle of using confinement and anticipation to break down victims' resistance was applied in various forms throughout the medieval period and beyond. The craftsman's dilemma. The creation of Iron Maidens and similar devices created a moral dilemma for craftsmen and engineers. Many skilled metalworkers found themselves pressured to create torture devices, using their technical expertise for purposes that contradicted their personal values. Some craftsmen refused to create torture devices, often at significant personal and professional cost. Others justified their participation by arguing that they were merely following orders or serving legitimate legal authorities. The moral complexity of these decisions reflects the broader ethical challenges faced by technical experts throughout history. The story of Johann Eisenhardt serves as a reminder that innovation and technical skill are morally neutral. Their value depends entirely on how they are applied. The same creativity and expertise that created beautiful religious art could be corrupted to create instruments of suffering. Chapter 4. The Brazen Bull. When artistic ambition meets deadly accident, the inventor's fatal gift. Or next tale transports us to ancient Sicily, around 560 BCE, during the reign of Phalaris, the tyrant of This story involves one of history's most notorious torture devices, but its origins lie not in deliberate cruelty, but in an ambitious artist's attempt to create the ultimate acoustic sculpture. Paralos of Athens was a master craftsman, renowned throughout the Greek world for his innovative bronze work. He specialized in creating sculptures that incorporated sound, musical instruments disguised as artistic pieces, temple bells that produced harmonious tones, and decorative items that created pleasant sounds when touched by the wind. Paralos had developed a particular fascination with the acoustic properties of bronze. He had discovered that the shape and thickness of bronze could be manipulated to produce specific tones and resonances. His workshop in Athens was filled with pieces, each designed to explore different aspects of sound production in metal. Asterisk. When Parellos heard about the wealth and power of Phalaris, he saw an opportunity to create his masterpiece. He envisioned a bronze sculpture that would be both visually impressive and acoustically remarkable, a life-sized bull that would produce beautiful, music-like sounds when properly activated. The acoustic engineering marvel. Parellos spent months designing his bronze bull. The sculpture would be hollow, with a complex internal structure designed to create resonance chambers. The bull's head would contain a sophisticated system of tubes and chambers that would transform sound waves into musical tones. The engineering challenges were enormous. Parellos had to calculate the exact dimensions of each internal chamber to produce the desired acoustic effects. The bronze had to be cast with perfect precision to ensure proper sound transmission. The internal tube system had to be positioned exactly to create the intended musical effects. Parellos' plan was to create a sculpture that would respond to external sounds by producing harmonious music. Voices, musical instruments, or even natural sounds like wind would be transformed by the bull's internal acoustic system into beautiful, resonant tones. The bull would serve as both a magnificent sculpture and a unique musical instrument. The construction process took nearly a year. Parellos used the finest bronze available, carefully controlling the composition of the metal to achieve optimal acoustic properties. The casting process required multiple attempts to achieve the precise internal structure necessary for proper sound production. The demonstration disaster. When Parellos completed his bronze bull, he was eager to demonstrate its remarkable properties to Phalaris. He arranged for a formal presentation in the tyrant's palace, bringing several musicians to help showcase the bull's acoustic capabilities. The demonstration began promisingly. When the musicians played their instruments near the bull, the sculpture did indeed produce interesting resonant effects. The sound was not quite the beautiful music that Parellos had envisioned, but it was certainly unique and impressive. However, Parellos had made a critical miscalculation in his acoustic engineering. The internal chamber system that was designed to create musical tones had an unintended effect when exposed to human voices. Instead of producing harmony, the chambers created a distortion effect that transformed human speech and cries into sounds that resembled the lowing of cattle. The discovery of this acoustic property occurred by accident when one of Parellos' assistants, while examining the interior of the bull, began calling out to colleagues outside. His voice, filtered through the bull's internal acoustic system, emerged as an eerie cattle-like sound that was both fascinating and disturbing. The tyrant's horrible inspiration. Phalaris was indeed impressed by the bull's acoustic properties, but not in the way that Parellos had hoped. The tyrant immediately grasped the potential of a device that could transform human cries into animal sounds. He realized that such a device could serve as both a torture instrument and a form of entertainment. The psychological impact of the acoustic transformation was particularly appealing to victims placed inside the bull would retain their ability to speak and cry out, but their human voices would be transformed into the sounds of an animal. This dehumanization would add an extra layer of psychological torture to the physical suffering. Ordered immediate modifications to the bull. A door was added to allow people to be placed inside. The internal chambers were adjusted to optimize the voice distortion effect. A fire pit was constructed beneath the bull, allowing the bronze to be heated while occupied. The inventor becomes the first victim in one of history's most brutal ironies. Parellos became the first victim of his own accidental invention. Phalaris, in a display of twisted logic, argued that the inventor should have the honor of being the first to experience his creation's full capabilities. Parellos was forced into the bronze bull while it was positioned over a fire. As the bronze heated, his screams of agony were transformed by his own acoustic engineering into the sounds of a bull. The crowd that had gathered to witness the demonstration of an artistic masterpiece, instead, witnessed the birth of one of history's most notorious torture devices. According to historical accounts, Phalaris allowed Parellos to suffer for some time before removing him from the bull. Though the inventor died shortly thereafter from his injuries, the tyrant kept the bull as a permanent fixture in his palace, using it to execute enemies and entertain guests with the grotesque spectacle. The acoustic science of suffering. Modern acoustic engineers have analyzed the principles behind the brazen bull's sound distortion effects. The device worked by using a series of resonance chambers that filtered and modified sound waves in specific ways. The bronze construction provided excellent sound transmission properties, while the internal chamber system created the distortion effects. The transformation of human voices into animal sounds was achieved through a combination of pitch shifting, harmonic filtering, and resonance manipulation. The heated bronze added another acoustic element, as the expansion of the metal changed the resonance properties of the internal chambers. creating additional sound distortion effects. The psychological impact of the voice transformation cannot be overstated. Victims retained their consciousness and ability to communicate, but their human voice, one of the most fundamental aspects of human identity, was stripped away and replaced with animal sounds. This dehumanization was perhaps as cruel as the physical torture itself. The spread of accidental cruelty, the brazen bull's reputation spread throughout the ancient world. Inspiring numerous variations and imitations, other tyrants commissioned their own versions, often with modifications designed to enhance the torture effects or create different types of sound distortion. The basic principle of using acoustic engineering to enhance psychological torture was applied to other devices and techniques. Chambers designed to amplify screams, echo chambers that created disorienting sound effects, and various other acoustic torture methods all traced their origins back to Perello's accidental discovery. The brazen bull also inspired torture devices that used the principle of enclosure and heating. Various forms of metal containers designed to slowly cook victims alive were developed based on the same basic concept as the bull. The artist's dilemma. The story of Perello illustrates the tragic potential for artistic and technical innovation to be corrupted for evil purposes. Perello was attempting to create something beautiful and extraordinary, a sculpture that would bring joy through its unique acoustic properties. His technical skill and creative vision were perverted into an instrument of suffering. This pattern has repeated throughout history. Artists, engineers, and inventors have seen their creations adapted for purposes that contradicted their original intentions. The same creativity that produces beauty can be twisted to produce horror when placed in the wrong hands. The brazen bull serves as a reminder that technical innovation is morally neutral. The acoustic engineering principles that Perello discovered could have been used to create beautiful musical instruments or enhance architectural acoustics. Instead, they were applied to create one of history's most feared torture devices. Historical impact and legacy. The brazen bull became one of the most notorious symbols of tyrannical cruelty in the ancient world. Its use by Phalaris contributed to his reputation as one of history's most brutal rulers. The device was eventually destroyed when Phalaris was overthrown, but its legend persisted for centuries. The psychological impact of the brazen bull extended far beyond its actual use. The mere threat of being placed in the device was often sufficient to extract confessions or compliance from victims. The bull's reputation as a torture device was amplified by storytellers and historians who embellished accounts of its use. The device also influenced legal and philosophical discussions about the nature of justice and punishment. Many ancient writers used the brazen bull as an example of excessive and inappropriate punishment, arguing for more humane approaches to criminal justice. Modern parallels and warnings. The story of the brazen bull remains relevant today as technology continues to advance at an unprecedented pace. Modern innovations in acoustics, materials science, and engineering could potentially be adapted for harmful purposes. Just as Perello's acoustic discoveries were corrupted in ancient times, the tale serves as a warning about the need for ethical consideration in technological development. While we cannot predict all possible applications of new technologies, we can work to ensure that innovations are developed and deployed responsibly. The brazen bull also reminds us of the importance of considering the potential for misuse when creating new technologies or techniques. The same principles that can enhance human life and create beauty can also be perverted to cause suffering if proper safeguards are not in place. Chapter 5. Scaphism, the honey trap of death. The beekeeper's accidental discovery. Our journey through accidental torture methods now takes us to ancient Persia. Around 401 BCE, during the reign of Artaxerxes II, this particular story emerges from the agricultural regions near Persepolis, where a humble beekeeper named Darius would make a discovery that would become one of history's most prolonged and psychologically devastating torture methods. Darius was a master beekeeper who supplied honey to the royal court and managed several large apiaries in the fertile valleys near the Persian capital. He was known for his innovative approaches to bee management and his ability to harvest honey without significantly disturbing the colonies. His methods were so successful that other beekeepers traveled from across the empire to learn his techniques. During the spring of 401 BCE, Darius was experimenting with new methods of protecting his beehives from thieves and wild animals. Honey was extremely valuable in the ancient world, and thefts from apiaries were common. Darius had tried various protective measures, but clever thieves continued to find ways to steal his precious honey stores. His innovative solution involved creating a series of wooden boats that could be partially submerged in the irrigation channels that ran through his property. These boats would be filled with honey and positioned in areas where thieves were likely to approach. The theory was that thieves would be attracted to the honey but would become trapped in the boats, which would be difficult to escape from while partially submerged. The experiment gone wrong. The first test of Darius' anti-theft system produced unexpected and horrifying results. A thief named Cyrus had indeed been attracted to the honey-filled boat and had become trapped exactly as Darius had planned. However, several factors combined to create a situation that went far beyond simple detention. First, the boat had become more deeply submerged than intended due to seasonal flooding in the irrigation channel. Cyrus found himself trapped in the boat with honey up to his waist, unable to climb out due to the slippery sides and the boat's position in the water. Second, the timing of the trap coincided with the peak of the local insect breeding season. The combination of warm weather, abundant water, and the massive amount of honey created an irresistible attraction for every fly, wasp, and other insect in the area. Within hours, Cyrus was covered with a living carpet of insects attracted to the honey.